Tyranitar with Yuki against James. On Yuki's side, we can see his team of Arcanine, Dragapult. Uh, I am blanking. Arcanine, Dragapult, Gastrodon, Excadrill, Tyranitar, and Togekiss. And on James's side, we can see a team of Duraludon, Arcanine, Gyarados, Conkeldurr, Vanillux, and Dragapult.
What do you think?
I'm thinking, first thoughts, I have to say, like, Yuki seems like kind of the top hits list of this format so far. It's kind of like when people are like, hey, what are the big threats in VGC 2020 right now? And you basically give them Yuki's team.
Yeah.
So
that core of Togekiss, Excadrill, and Dragapult go very well together defensively, and then Tyranitar is a natural include to go well with Excadrill. Excadrill can have the ability Sand Rush to double its speed under sand, which Tyranitar very helpfully gives. And one of the interesting answers to that team, of course, is Vanillux. Vanillux as an ice type, it can just spam blizzards into Togekiss and Dragapult. Of course, it doesn't like to see Excadrill as we have seen on the field right now. But all in all, I think Vanillux is going to be the key piece to taking apart Togekiss and Dragapult from Yuki.
Also very interesting in this matchup for its ability to just change the weather over the hail. Not coming in really here because Yuki is just going to swap immediately to Tyranitar. Probably get the Sand Rush up as he... I believe this is Yuki Dynamaxing?
I think this is Yuki's Dynamax.
Dynamaxing the Excadrill. Going for a very hyper-aggressive option right here. Trying to get as much damage as possible as Excadrill.
Excadrill, of course, is a super good Dynamax user. Its primary stabs, ground, and steel type become max Steel Spike and Quake, and those give it defense boosts and special defense boosts, respectively. So it becomes very difficult to knock out Excadrill if it spends even a couple turns in Dynamax form, even after it's done Dynamaxing, because it has all of those defense boosts from just spamming its powerful attacks.
James also opts for a turn 1 Dynamax, and we see a little neat option here with an Ice Shard coming out into his Dragapult, activating a weakness policy that we've seen so commonly with Dynamax. As Yuki goes for a Steel Spike with his now boosted Excadrill, getting a critical hit, but still not being enough to take out that Dragapult.
Yeah. And now this is really interesting. Depending on whether this is physical or special Dragapult, that could change the damage calcs here. I'm going to guess that's physical because Excadrill got a defense boost, and I would expect special Dragapult to do a little more damage.
Yeah. And we do see the defense dropping again, basically ending up neutral.
Yeah.
But that Dragapult is still a very scary threat, other than the fact that Excadrill is a bit faster right now and does have the KO potential.
Yeah, so Yuki could finagle a situation. Maybe he protects the Dragapult, switches out Vanillux, and then the turn after switches in Vanillux to steal the sand away. But I think the tempo advantage is definitely in favor of Yuki here. Very powerful turn 1 switch to bring up the sand and get off that damage very quickly.
James reacting, potentially going with the play you mentioned, bringing in Gyarados, Intimidate being a big helper as both of these tend to be physical attackers.
Yep.
And just regarding the Steel Spike to live. But Yuki also having Dragon Dance on his Tyranitar, being able to get even more set up on his side for that switch.
He's pretty happy to take that Intimidate and then shake it off thanks to Dragon Dance. And now with some speed boosts, he'll be faster than Gyarados. Gyarados will now be in threat of being flinched by a Rock Slide, for example.
Also just takes a lot of damage from both of these options. James now does have the option that you mentioned before, bringing in Vanillux, switching the weather, making Dragapult the fastest.
Yep.
That does give him a lot of options because it, with the Excadrill now being defense dropped, it can be KO'd again by a Max Phantasm rather. And James does opt for this. It does set up the hail to get rid of the sand, give his team, and go straight for the Max Phantasm. Should be enough to KO this Excadrill, and it does.
Yeah, very nice play by James to bring the weather back into his side, and he'll take down Excadrill, but you have to wonder how much did it cost him. He no longer has his Dynamax. Vanillux is about to probably take a bunch of damage from this Rock Slide. Oh, I take it back. Vanillux is totally fine.
It does avoid the rock slide.
Yeah.
Still able to take out the Dragapult.
Yeah. All right,
An interesting alternative that Yuki did have there is setting up, again, just expecting something like this. He did opt for the safer play
Yep.
With this rock slide. But that Vanillix miss is very unfortunate for him.
Yeah. And it makes you wonder if the Vanillix will be faster than Tyranitar at +1 speed. Vanillix is naturally considerably faster than Tyranitar, but thanks to that Dragon Dance, depending on how these Pokemon are trained, if it's a very bulky Tyranitar, it might still be slower than Vanillix.
Both players now thinking what to bring in to replace their respective Dynamax Mons. James opting for Conkeldurr. Another pretty slow threat, but a great check to Tyranitar. As Yuki brings in an Intimidator with this Arcanine. Able to threaten the Vanillix while... Yeah, I know, he plays in Japanese. Able to threaten the Vanillix while also intimidating to reduce the threat from that Conkeldurr just a bit.
Yeah. I think Conkeldurr is still perfectly happy to be here, unless it's like a very offensive Arcanine, maybe like a Choice Band or Life Orb Flare Blitz will do a lot of damage to Conkeldurr, but I think for the most part, Conkeldurr is pretty happy to just sit here and throw out fighting-type moves unless there's like a Dragapult or a Togekiss in the back for Yuki, which there very well could be. Gyarados, of course, is also quite happy in this situation, seeing Arcanine. Arcanine very rarely carries moves like Wild Charge, so that's something to watch out for. But for the most part, Gyarados will be happy to be in front of Tyranitar with multiple Intimidates and Arcanine.
Yeah. And also able to just live some Wild Charges depending on the option.
Oh, that's
which
true.
Is definitely something that James could be counting on here. But Yuki not having that, instead opting for a special Arcanine, going for a Flamethrower, does get a burn, which could be a very big deal on this Gyarados.
Yeah, and no Lumberry to shake off that burn. So Gyarados is probably not going to be doing a whole lot of damage here. Arcanine taking a Stone Edge, won't be too happy about that, but it does let us know that Conkeldurr also has a move that could do damage to Togekiss, which is pretty important in this situation.
Yeah, Conkeldurr activating a Flame Orb of its own for the Guts boost does actually have moves to cover all of Yuki's remaining threats if he can keep it alive, is what he's just shown with that Stone Edge.
And also if he can keep it from getting flinched by Togekiss's Air Slash, which Conkeldurr, of course, is very slow. It's pretty chunky, but it won't take too kindly to Air Slashes or Dazzling Gleams or anything like that from Togekiss.
Yep. So James definitely feeling like he has somewhat of an advantageous position, just needing to keep this Conkeldurr alive. Have to wonder how offensive Yuki's Togekiss is, though, for some big threat.
Of course, if it's like an offensive version with weakness policy, as we mentioned earlier, Stone Edging it would be a horrible mistake because it would turn around and just start taking knockouts. But if it's like a defensive Babiri set, like there's no more steel moves on James's team, so he doesn't even need to worry about that.
Yep. James realizing Conkeldurr is his biggest threat and probably key to victory, does opt to protect it as Gyarados goes for a Waterfall into that Tyranitar switch in. Probably not doing as much as it would against the Arcanine, but still doing a pretty big chunk to this Tyranitar.
Yeah, for a burned Gyarados, that's perfectly respectable damage. And now sort of a tricky spot for Yuki, because if he opts to go for an offensive move with his Togekiss, it could leave his Tyranitar open to a move like Mach Punch from Conkeldurr to just take a knockout really quick there. And then from there, he might be able to clean up Togekiss with Vanillix in the back. So sort of figuring out how to preserve this Vanillix to take on Togekiss seems to be James's endgame goal here. Another Intimidate.
Yeah, Yuki opting to just keep cycling this Arcanine as many times as he can, get these Intimidates off, make it so that Conkeldurr is just less of a threat. James being able to kind of counteract it with this switch, bringing in the Vanillix, changing the weather again, but also resetting those attack drops on the Conkeldurr.
Yeah, that could be very important. And as James continues to rack up chip damage with these waterfalls, Yuki's Pokemon fall further and further into something like Blizzard range. Vanillix, of course, more than happy to run Blizzard since it provides itself the hail necessary to make that Blizzard move 100% accurate. Tyranitar in the back will be taking away that hail probably quite soon, but that is definitely the clock that Yuki is working against, is how can I stop myself from being swept endgame by a by Vanillix spamming Blizzard.
Yep, absolutely. There's also just a lot of like as turns go on, more and more chip damage comes out, and options such as Extreme Speed or Mach Punch become just more and more powerful, which both of
Absolutely.
these teams could have.
Is that a disconnect from us or for them?
It's the looks like a disconnect on their side.
Yeah.
Nope, or not.
No, I think
Looks
it
like the game's
disconnected and
still
it'll just
going.
run the turn out.
Yeah, it looks like
They're not talking to each other though. We'll see if the game continues to go for them.
Yeah.
All right, what I can tell you about that turn is that was a flamethrower out of Arcanine and an air slash out of Togekiss. And taking a knockout on the Vanillux and doing a whole lot of damage to the what is that Pokemon's name? Conkeldurr, as it switched in. But with a disconnect there, we'll have to see. I'm not super familiar with the disconnect rules, but we'll have to check with our tournament organizer to see how this is going to be resolved. So we'll be back in just a moment. Bringing you guys an update really quick. We called the judge over, and Yuki and James have agreed that there was pretty much no way for James to clinch out the end of the game there with Togekiss at such high health, Hail ticking down, Burns ticking down. And so they will be moving on to Game 2 with Yuki taking the win from Game 1. In just a moment, we'll be bringing you the second game as soon as they get started.
Are you guys searching? Because they're searching.
Searching? Let us know when the switch pops up. Are we good? Ready. All right. And back into team preview. All right, how are these players going to shake things up?
I think one of the most interesting things is just how much of an attrition more this battle is. So
Yeah.
being able to bring options that maybe don't get ticked down as much, like the Conkeldurr is a great option against Yuki's team, but if the game goes long, it's going to hit itself with the Flame Orb, but there's almost always going to be weather that reduces its health.
Yep.
And that just puts it in a position where it can't actually battle because it's such a slow threat.
Mm-hmm. I absolutely agree. And one of the interesting things I think coming out of that second game, we saw James focusing very hard on taking down Excadrill early in the game, and I think if he manages to do that again but brings Duraludon in the back, suddenly Duraludon looks very scary against Yuki's team. Of course, Gastrodon is pretty good against Duraludon as well as Excadrill, but I don't think Yuki has a whole lot of incentive to bring Gastrodon to a game like this.
Yeah, Gastrodon would definitely be a kind of weird pick. Does give him options against Gyarados if it's just going to keep spamming waterfalls.
Yeah.
Which doesn't hurt, but is obviously also threatened by a potential Power Whip that Gyarados recently got.
Yep.
Which I can imagine being quite common.
Gyarados does love to run Power Whip to get around other bulky water types. Sort of makes you wonder how it uses Power Whip.
My thought has always been the Whiskers.
The Whiskers? I just sort of figured it would wiggle itself.
That seems
like, surely that's enough force, right? Anyways, getting into game 2. Arcanine and Conkeldurr coming out of James for an Excadrill and Togekiss lead from Yuki.
Yuki is opting for the exact same lead as last time.
Mm-hmm.
This lead actually gives him a lot of utility because Togekiss potentially has Follow Me or things to protect Excadrill, but he can also just swap right into Tyranitar and guarantee himself the weather if he wants. So there's a lot of power from a lead like this out of Yuki, and it's one of my preferred leads alongside Excadrill.
Yeah. No, I'm also really liking the position that Togekiss is sitting in here. It can just click follow me pretty happily and not really fear a whole lot of damage from either Conkeldurr or Arcanine. We saw Stone Edge from Conkeldurr last game, but without the Flame Orb boost going just yet, Conkeldurr doesn't get Flame Orb boost until the second turn it's on the field. It'll take a little bit for it to start ramping up. Gyarados coming in for James.
And Yuki opting not, appearing to not opt for the speed boost option this time. Just getting another Intimidate off, making this Excadrill not very useful, as he actually double swaps both. We see the Duraludon, kind of a new pickup, leaving the Vanillite behind. Seems a bit weird, given how effective it was against the weather, but maybe James just has another plan.
Sort of a funny turn one. Yuki's Swords Dancing at the end there with Excadrill will neutralize both of the Intimidate drops it received last turn. So maybe you could sort of think of this as a new game, a new turn one.
Yeah, it's definitely a new turn one. You have to guess that James is happy with that, given that he just double swapped.
Yeah.
Not being super hard punished for it, with the only cost being a Swords Dance instead of damage, is usually kind of your dream scenario when you do a double swap.
Yeah, and now neither of James's Pokemon are particularly scared of Togekiss. Duraludon, of course, needs to keep mindful of too many Max Quakes coming out of Excadrill. But I think these two Pokemon are much better equipped to take on Togekiss and Excadrill than the two Pokemon that James now has in the back.
But James, keeping it fresh, going to swap out again, get another Intimidate with this Arcanine.
It is a revolving door of Pokemon, as the pros love to say.
Yep. Trying to keep this Excadrill down, where we see Yuki finally bringing in, not actually the Tyranitar, the Arcanine, getting Intimidates of his own. As we see, swaps all around. Going to just keep getting attack drops and keep the slow grinding game going.
Yeah.
Yuki now Dynamaxing his Excadrill, finally ready to go on the offense. The Excadrill did get an attack drop though, so it's still at -1, but is a threat.
Importantly, it's no longer able to Swords Dance when Pokemon Dynamax. Swords Dance becomes Max Guard, so it'll be sitting at that -1 attack for the foreseeable future. But with the damage boost from its max moves, hopefully for Yuki, it'll be able to dish out a whole lot of damage here. Maybe with a Max Steel Strike or a Max Quake into that Arcanine as it switches in. Let's see how it plays out.
And we see Yuki going for a Max Rock Fall, probably evaluating this Gyarados as the biggest threat, setting weather for himself, while also getting a reasonable amount of damage against the Dynamax Gyarados for the situation. Gyarados did have the option to switch the weather rate back, but instead opts for a Max Airstream, getting a speed boost, making sure his Pokemon are the fastest ones on the field for James.
Yeah, unfortunately, Excadrill will still probably be the fastest Pokemon on the field, but James doesn't need to worry about either of his Pokemon being slower than Yuki's Arcanine at this point.
Of course, yeah, the Sand Rush being super relevant. Worth noting that James this time doesn't have a way to immediately get another attack drop on this Excadrill, so it's going to be able to do a reasonable amount of damage as we go along. Lucy, we can't see. What? Yeah, we just couldn't see. As we see, James now bringing in Conkeldurr again as Excadrill Max Quakes into that slot. Conkeldurr probably being James's best option to take that attack, given the 4 he decided to bring into this match.
Yeah, Conkeldurr is reasonably physically bulky. It's got, I want to say it's like a base 110 physical defense or something like that, but it's perfectly happy, and Gyarados dodging a Will-O-Wisp there, I believe, will be very good.
Especially as Max
Geyser,
rather, is able to pick up this Arcanine and stop it from being able to try again next turn.
Yeah, Yuki will now need to bring in Tyranitar if he wants the sand back, but Tyranitar won't be too happy to see Conkeldurr and Gyarados on the field.
Absolutely. You have to wonder if Yuki even brought the Tyranitar, and we haven't seen it yet, and it is a good threat, but it is threatened by so many Pokemon that James has been bringing in here.
That's true, and even though Excadrill, of course, has the Sand Rush to go alongside Tyranitar, it's a perfectly powerful Pokemon even without that ability. You know, we see Excadrill oftentimes carries the ability Mold Breaker, and I guess you could think of it as just a Mold Breaker Excadrill because there's no Pokemon that really would lose their abilities from its attacks on James's side. Of course, Yuki makes a liar out of me, bringing in Tyranitar. He says, I am no coward. I will bring Tyranitar into Conkeldurr and Gyarados. I have no fear. But going to make sure that Excadrill is moving quick.
Also helping protect Excadrill from Gyarados, which is a massive threat with the Geyser boosted by Rain.
That's true.
Probably just deciding it's his kind of only option to keep his Pokemon alive.
Mm-hmm. At this point, Excadrill has used a max Rockfall and a max Quake, so it doesn't have any physical defense boosts. And another Intimidate, Excadrill now falling to -2 attack. It's not doing a whole lot of damage here.
His team does do a good job of making it so that these max Steel Spikes rather, aren't really the option he wants to go for as much. It does give him the defense boost, and this is going to be nice, but the damage it does to most of the Pokemon on James's team is pretty mediocre.
Yeah. Of course, you would rather Steel Strike like the Vanillix than Quake it, but most of these other Pokemon, Arcanine and Duraludon, and to a lesser extent, the Conkeldurr, you would be preferring to Quake into them over Steel Spiking, and without those physical defense boosts, he's going to be taking a lot of damage from this Gyarados. Weakness Policy.
We actually see Weakness Policy, which does explain a bit about this Excadrill, but it's going to make it a huge threat, even though James was able to use the last turn of Dynamax to set Rain one more time.
I think Excadrill is now at neutral attack because of so many Intimidates. Even though it's Sword Stanced and gotten a Weakness Policy boost, it's still at neutral because it's been intimidated 4 times.
Yeah, but neutral is still going to be way more useful for Yuki than a -2.
Absolutely.
Excadrill. So that's power to him. Not going to matter. Oh, actually is going to matter.
Excadrill hangs on.
Excadrill is able to hang on from a rain-boosted waterfall somehow, going into a Rock Slide, doing a good amount of damage to that Gyarados.
I wonder how defensive each of these Pokemon are, because obviously you don't need to invest a whole lot of speed in Excadrill if it's going to be benefiting from Sand Rush.
Yep.
And to a lesser degree, with Gyarados stacking up a whole lot of Intimidate boosts, you might opt to make a very defensive Gyarados and just say, I don't really care about going first if I'm going to max Airstream a whole bunch, and win the speed war that way.
But when you add them together, it leads to very interesting scenarios where you have Excadrill's living waterfalls
in the
that
rain.
You would never expect.
Excadrill will back out there, preserving it for the end of the game as Togekiss comes back in. Togekiss, of course, was around for the very start of the game, switched out, and will be returning once again. Gyarados falls to the Rock Slide from Tyranitar. Tyranitar did pull a Dragon Dance while we weren't looking, and so it'll be going pretty quick and doing a whole lot of damage, but not a whole lot of damage to Duraludon, which is going to be, I think I pointed out in Team Preview, a very scary threat in the end game. With Excadrill on such little health, he needs to find a way to take down this Duraludon with a Togekiss and a Tyranitar and maybe an Earthquake at the very end.
Yeah. James does bring in his other Intimidator, Arcanine, but he's now in a situation where he can't constantly rotate them near as easily as he did with the Gyarados now being gone. Rock Slide still going to do a good amount to Arcanine despite the Intimidate. Does a bit to Duraludon, potentially hoping for a flinch. That is always an option. Snarl from Arcanine going to reduce the damage from Togekiss, but he still could go for more flinch shenanigans if he decides for another Air Slash.
Flash Cannon is going to do a whole lot of damage. Tyranitar depends on the sand to boost its special defense, and Flash Cannon will do a whole lot there. Yawn is very interesting. This will force Duraludon to switch out or fall asleep, which could give Yuki a window to get some important damage on Duraludon without it being able to respond.
Yeah, definitely a good option for dealing with the Duraludon, but it does leave the Duraludon open to attack one more time, which is it definitely enough to take out the Tyranitar in
Yeah,
this situation.
could be
And
enough.
that could be a trade-off that James is just willing to take to get one of the threats off the board. Togekiss potentially, Yuki potentially predicting this, decides to follow me, try and stop Duraludon from taking out this Tyranitar as he rock slides, hoping for potentially a flinch on the Duraludon and a KO on the Arcanine, missing the Arcanine though. As Snarl comes out, dropping special attack once more on both of Yuki's Pokemon. Not going to do a lot of damage though, and Duraludon does get the flinch, making up, more than making up for that miss on the Arcanine for
Yeah.
Yuki.
Duraludon here, asleep, will no longer be able to threaten Tyranitar and Togekiss for a short time. Sleep, of course, means you cannot act on the first turn that you are asleep, and after that, you have a progressively larger chance to wake up. The second turn, you have a third chance. The third turn, you have 2/3 chance. The final turn, guaranteed to wake up. But this will give Yuki the window that he might need to take down Duraludon if he can navigate this situation
We
right.
see him opting for that, as you suggested, crunching into that as Arcanine snarls once more, really not putting a lot of damage, but making sure this Togekiss is purely in a supportive role at this point.
Yeah, maybe he's hoping to save himself a whole bunch of like Dazzling Gleam damage from this Togekiss. Togekiss's Dazzling Gleam, of course, maybe not the most powerful move in the world, but with Duraludon's very low special defense, could be enough to pick up a knockout there. But at this point, Yuki says he's not even going to bother. He's just going to be yawning everything on the field to try to set up, maybe for Excadrill in the back, to just click Earthquake next to this Togekiss and seal the game.
Also have to wonder if Yuki does decide to maybe swap out the Togekiss at some point. Use the Excadrill as a sacrifice to get Togekiss back in with full special attack.
That's true.
Because with Arcanine being gone, Dazzling Gleam is a pretty good option on the remaining two Pokemon from James. Yuki instead going for the pretty low damage Air Slash, but potentially covering scenarios of where it either switches or wakes up.
Yeah, all of those Snarl special attack drops paying off, maybe? I'm not sure how much damage that Air Slash would have done even without all of those special attack drops, but definitely not a whole lot of damage coming out of that Togekiss.
We see James's last Pokemon of the Conkeldurr coming out, still at a good amount of HP, but would be threatened by this Togekiss if it weren't for the so many special attack drops it got from Snarls from this Arcanine. Have to wonder how Yuki's going to position around this to deal with it, because it is a big threat to his two other remaining Pokemon. As both players consider their options. Yuki's Excadrill, of course, being at pretty low health, but he does opt for a Follow Me, keeping the Togekiss in, and relying on the Tyranitar to kind of be able to close out this game as it goes for another crunch on the Duraludon. Still not enough, but Duraludon is still going to keep snoozing.
Wow.
James
A lot of
making-
Stone Edge damage, a critical hit combined with that Flame Orb burn and Conkeldurr's ability Guts will be enough to take out Togekiss almost in one shot. And now a very tricky situation for Yuki, where if this Conkeldurr has a move like Mach Punch, he might just be able to clean up the game outright with that.
Yeah, Mach Punch is definitely a huge threat against both of Yuki's Pokemon remaining, and Duraludon somehow able to hold on through this sleep, has a very good chance of waking up now, and being the last one remaining.
And yeah, just a very tricky spot for Yuki. He might just have to hope that James can't wake up here. But no, Mach Punch will be enough to take out Excadrill, and from here, Tyranitar has no real hope of taking out Conkeldurr by itself. Rock Slide flinches might be away, but I mean, James can just click Mach Punch and not even worry about being flinched, so that'll be it.
Yeah, the Rock Slide being able to finally pick up the Duraludon is super helpful, but it's too little, too late, because that Mach Punch, as you mentioned, is going to do a ton of damage. And be able to close out the game as Yuki surrenders.
Right.
Bringing it to an exciting Game 3 between James and Yuki.
How do you think this game will change up for one last round between these two players?
Yeah, one last round is very interesting. I wouldn't have expected James to swap from Vanillix, like swapping out the Vanillix, but it did a lot of work for him.
Yeah.
And now he's in a scenario where 3 of his Pokemon are just hard threats to Tyranitar. And this maybe means that Yuki decides that bringing in Tyranitar is not worth it for him and brings in another threat in its own right. Tyranitar did do a lot of work, but that's one of his options to answer it.
And you have to wonder about adjustments from James's side. Duraludon did some fantastic work there, of course. And then Arcanine and Gyarados intimidating Excadrill over and over and over again. Worked out very well for him, keeping that Excadrill low on attack, even through Swords Dance, even through Weakness Policy. And Conkeldurr cleaning up the endgame with Mach Punch, doing so much damage with that Stone Edge. All of these Pokemon are very good, and he would need a very good reason, I think, to bring Vanillix to this third game. So I would be surprised to see it, to be honest.
Yeah, I can absolutely see that as we go in and figure out what Yuki's going to do to make this change. Togekiss seems to be doing a lot of work with him. The Yawns just being able to buy him a lot of space.
Yep.
Follow Me also letting his Pokemon set up in the face of otherwise very scary threats.
Togekiss is more than happy to stand in front of Arcanine and Gyarados, and, well, it would have been happy to stand in front of Conkeldurr if it weren't for that Stone Edge critical hit. But we'll have to see if Yuki maybe plays a little more aggressively with his Togekiss instead of switching it out turn 1 and then only bringing it back for the end game, maybe to try to advance a board state with Follow Me and Swords Dance over and over and over again to try to set up a critical mass of attack boosts on Excadrill. Let's see how this third game shakes out.
Loading in, we see James once again opting to bring in one Intimidator and partnered with the Duraludon, and Yuki brings in the same lead one more time with Excadrill Togekiss. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. But Yuki does need to have a plan for answering the constant Intimidate cycling from James that he wasn't able to do last game.
Yeah, and on the surface it might look like Excadrill is happy to click Earthquake here, but it seems very likely that a Gyarados switch-in will come in here, as James played very aggressively with his Intimidate cycling last game, and so maybe Excadrill isn't in as good of a spot as it might first appear to be in this game 3.
Have to wonder if he's trying to set up another Swords Dance again, or if he's going to just get the Excadrill out of there and go for a different option. The Swords Dance does give him an ability to fight these Intimidates, but it doesn't really help him progress the game as much because he isn't going to get damage out as he's Swords Dancing to try and prevent Intimidates. And James goes for the turn 1 Dynamax this time, instead of switching, deciding to bring that Duraludon up and hopefully just live through Earthquakes instead.
Well, with that Intimidate dropping Excadrill's attack and Excadrill being incentivized to use Swords Dance here, James just says, I'm not even worried about taking a big ground-type move on my Duraludon, and even if I do take a big ground-type move, well, it's at -1 attack already, so why even worry about it? And in exchange, this Duraludon is about to start putting out a lot of damage with Max Steel Spike. The Steel-type Dynamax move that boosts its defense and will allow it to be ready to take on Excadrill in the coming turns as well.
Now boosting its defense to match the Swords Dance increase, leaving him in basically a base state again, as Yuki is going for Yawns, trying to get that Arcanine out of there. We'll see. James last time was pretty happy keeping his Yawnmon in, but it wasn't able to do much for the rest of the game.
Yeah.
We'll have to see if he decides to change that or just keep it going.
This early in the game, with so many options to switch into, I think James would be reasonably happy to switch out Arcanine. But the big threat here is Togekiss getting a Yawn into the Duraludon slot and putting it to sleep, maybe making those stat boosts that it'll be accumulating during its Dynamax 3 turns be less effective if it falls asleep, right?
Absolutely. Though, on the plus side for James, being Yawned here does let his Duraludon finish the full set of Dynamax turns at the bare minimum. And we've seen that time and time again in other games, be able to create enough boost to just take over the game. Maybe he's willing to live out the sleep if by just boosting himself enough during those 3 Dynamax turns.
Yeah.
Expecting that from Yuki.
3 defense boosts is a lot of defense boost, especially with Duraludon already having a high physical defense stat.
Yuki now bringing in a Dynamax of his own, Dynamaxing the Extra Drill for a 3rd time this set. Getting that big health pool that we've seen from Dynamax, as well as just being prepared to do as much damage as possible into James's threats.
Togekiss will use Follow Me, maybe scared of Arcanine throwing off a Will-O-Wisp into the Excadrill slot, or maybe a Flare Blitz or something like that. But that Max Quake could have done a whole lot more damage, but thanks to Intimidates and James's defense boost from that Steel Strike, won't be doing that much damage. Max Lightning into Togekiss.
Max Lightning being kind of an interesting choice here. Setting up Electric Terrain does mean that Yawns into James's Pokemon won't actually be able to put them to sleep if they're grounded, being able to keep this Duraludon awake, but at the trade-off of losing the defense boost that he would have gotten from a Steel Spike.
That's true. I don't think it'll make a big impact immediately on this turn. Togekiss very likely would have been knocked out by 2 Max Steel Spikes, in the same way it'll be knocked out by 2 Max Lightnings. But if you want to include Gyarados maybe setting up, maybe having the opportunity to set up like a Dragon Dance or something right here if it has it, this could be a very good spot for James.
James does have to be aware of also the Dynamax turn difference, knowing that Yuki has 1 extra turn of Dynamax left over him. But he does bring in Arcanine, happy to just keep getting this Intimidates off, lowering the attack of Excadrill over and over, back down to -1. As Yuki does swap out the Togekiss, not wanting to take another hit from this Duraludon. Also, maybe not being able to sleep anymore, as Sandstorm comes in, making Excadrill once again the fastest Pokemon in the field.
Max Rockfall coming out of Excadrill. He'll choose to just not even challenge Dragapult this turn with a Max Quake, and will take a lot of damage on Arcanine for it. Steel Spike into the Tyranitar slot, continuing to rack up those defense boosts. This will be a very sticky and hard to deal with Dragapult, even though Yuki has that big old ground type Excadrill in the way.
Both players making kind of interesting coverage options. Steel Spike obviously being able to hit both Togekiss and Tyranitar for super effective damage, and giving him the defense boost that he desperately wants. Whereas on Yuki's side, opting for the Rock Fall to cover both Gyarados and Arcanine, being able to punish these Intimidates just a bit without losing too much on if James decides to keep Gyarados in. James still going to cycle more Intimidates, getting Excadrill down to -2, as reducing the damage output from it as much as possible as Dynamax is about to end.
Arcanine coming out of Yuki. We saw a Flamethrower from that Arcanine, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it'll be more than happy to do a whole lot of damage to Duraludon with that Flamethrower, ignoring all of those defense boosts that it's built up. So,
and Max Ground going into the Gyarados, kind of unfortunate, hoping for the Arcanine to stay in. Going to lose Yuki out for that opportunity for another special defense boost, potentially making this Excadrill a lot less bulky than it was hoping to be, and might just be the answer for James to close out this game.
Yeah.
By making this Excadrill more and more useless as time goes on.
And Gyarados is not scared of either of these Pokemon. Excadrill might have done a whole lot of damage with a Max Rockfall, but Rock Slide, much lower power, divided between 2 targets. Don't even worry about it with all of those Intimidate boosts stacked up. As Excadrill Sword Stances again, I think it's at neutral again now.
Yep. And Snarl coming out, hoping to reduce the attack of the Duraludon, as a Waterfall barely misses the KO on this Arcanine, able to heal back up a bit with that berry. Still in KO range, as this Dragon Pulse comes out, probably being enough to clean it up.
Yep. That will do enough to knock it out, and James takes the first knockout of this game 3. That was a very a long beginning to the game, but now we are moving into the back half. These players have whittled down each other's Dynamax, taken away that resource, and now it's time to see who can seal up the game. Um, I'm still thinking James's Gyarados is looking in a commanding position here.
Yeah. Yuki does bring in the Togekiss again to try and protect the Excadrill more, but the Excadrill is still only at neutral attack, and we've seen it's a very bulky Excadrill.
Mm-hmm.
So it's in a scenario where neutral attack probably doesn't threaten a KO on either of James's Pokemon. He does go for the Earthquake despite this, hoping to just get as much damage as possible onto this Duraludon, but 2 Steel Spike boosts is enough to keep it in this game. Gyarados now going for a Waterfall into the Togekiss, and as Duraludon follows up with the Flash Cannon, hoping to finish it off, but the Babiri Berry is going to help protect it a bit, and it barely hangs on.
Yawn could be very important. That electric terrain, of course, means that Pokemon that are on the ground cannot fall asleep, but Gyarados is in the sky, not affected by terrains, meaning that if it stays in for this turn, it will fall asleep.
An electric terrain wearing off means Yuki can even just go for another Yawn into the Duraludon now. Trying to basically go for the same endgame of that he went for before, where he has sleeping targets for Excadrill to slowly take down.
Mm-hmm. You have to wonder what the last Pokemon James has is, because with Togekiss this low on health, I mean, if it's Conkeldurr again, it's very scary position for Yuki, right?
Yeah, Conkeldurr is threatened a lot by, definitely threatened by the Togekiss, but it doesn't have much left in there.
Yeah, I mean,
and
Togekiss...
with James's targeting, I would not be surprised.
Yeah. Togekiss will protect to give Excadrill a Swords Dance. Maybe that's his out against Conkeldurr. Just try to rack up enough Swords Dance boosts to maybe Earthquake it twice to knock it out. Flash Cannon doing no damage.
Yeah, Yuki making some good reads there to just get his Excadrill's attack finally up to above the neutral stage for the first time in a long time, despite all these Swords Dances. Still having to be worried about Intimidates a bit, but finally in a position where he can be very threatening again to both of the Pokemon on James's side. Have to wonder how James is going to respond to this Earthquake. Once again, bringing in Gyarados, reducing the attack again on this Excadrill, never wanting it to be too high up.
Is it back to neutral?
Yeah, neutral
is neutral,
my,
and then we saw...
is where I believe we are currently at. As Earthquake comes out, should be enough to finally take out this bulky Duraludon.
Yep.
As Yuki does take his first KO of the game, evening up the score. As an Air Slash coming out, going to do a good amount to Gyarados, but not enough to put in KO range.
Intimidate, of course, helping reduce Excadrill's damage output, but has no effect on Togekiss's special attacks like Air Slash, Dazzling Gleam. And it will be Conkeldurr in the back for James. Let's see how Yuki responds.
Conkeldurr in the back for James is bringing out the Conkeldurr is interesting. Togekiss is still on the field, but it might be able to be KO'd by a Mach Punch with how low it is at this point. Gyarados still a valid threat, being able to probably survive another Air Slash from Togekiss, so needing to be dealt with by this Excadrill as well. Yuki does always have the option of just going for flinch moves with both his Pokemon and seeing where that gets him, but it doesn't seem to be his choice.
James going to opt for the double protect here. He wants to buy a turn so that the Flame Orb will activate on his Conkeldurr to increase his damage. Maybe concerned that a Mach Punch into Togekiss wouldn't KO without that boost from Guts.
We do see Yuki just going for the flinch moves, trying to get as much damage as possible on both the Pokemon, and potentially just grabbing a free flinch.
That's true.
At the same time. James does have the Flame Orb now, and does have an option of a pretty powerful Mach Punch into either of these Pokemon. Though hitting Excadrill is a bit scary because it's been able to live a lot of other options before, and living this Mach Punch does give it a weakness policy boost that can probably close out the rest of the game.
That's true. Hitting those weakness policy Pokemon with super effective moves when you're not sure whether or not they'll knock out is a very frightening prospect and can very easily lead to you taking a whole lot of knockouts in return.
Yuki also having to be just a bit worried, probably expecting the Togekiss to go down here. could follow me just to ensure that it is the Togekiss, but he opts to protect again, trying to keep Togekiss alive from a potential Mach Punch. Instead goes into the Excadrill and is enough to take it down with that Flame Orb boost, despite all the attempts from Yuki to keep it alive. James being very happy with that situation, getting rid of the biggest threat remaining on Yuki's team. Last Pokemon coming out, haven't seen it yet,
It's
but if it's the
Tyranitar.
Tyranitar.
Yeah, it is Tyranitar.
Oh, right. Yes,
did
we did
see
see
it
the
earlier.
Tyranitar. You're right. But if it's Tyranitar, this Conkeldurr's in a commanding position.
Yeah, I don't think James is even worried about this endgame. He can double protect his Pokemon again, get some Sand Chip on that Togekiss, and from there Mach Punch will definitely knock it out. So, do you see any way for Yuki to get out of this position?
I
Maybe
think
if James gets
Yuki
a little too hasty?
I think the only scenario Yuki has to rely on here is somehow being able to keep the Tyranitar in, but just going for 100 accurate moves on both Pokemon is enough to KO, so I'm not sure where that leaves him. Rock Slide does come out to the Tyranitar being faster than the Gyarados. That's actually going to do a lot of damage. Be able to take out Gyarados. Conkeldurr's still hanging in very well, though, as Togekiss falls to Sandstorm damage.
Togekiss going for a double protect there. If it had succeeded at that, it wouldn't have taken the Mach Punch damage and would have been alive for one more turn. But, I mean, even if it had, what's Tyranitar doing to this Conkeldurr? As Arcanine comes in here for James, and that should be the game with Mach Punch.
James just being very persistent there this whole game, opting to keep intimidating, fighting through all these Swords Dances, keeping the Excadrill at super low attack until it was finally in a position to be KO'd by a single Mach Punch.
Swords Dance and
closing it out.
Weakness Policy and all of those attack boosts just weren't enough. Of course, Excadrill has to stay on the field to benefit from Sandstream, and it leaves it vulnerable to being Intimidate cycled on by Arcanine. And